Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Rushing the Field, a national college football show from NBC Sports. He's Joshua Perry. I'm Nicole Auerbach. We are excited to be here in the thick of things in the postseason. We have had our annual Pop-Tart mascot sacrifice, and we are inching closer to quarterfinal games in the college football playoff. First of all, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Joshua, to you and all of our listeners.
Same to you, Nicole. Hope it was a great holiday season. Hope everybody's gearing up for very happy New Year. Phenomenal to spend time with family. Phenomenal to get time to watch football, and I hope everybody feels the same way.
Yeah, there are not too many bowls because they're basically just wallpaper. It's great to always have something on. And by the way, we'll get to this in a second because we're going to talk about the Cam Ward halftime opt-out. But man, these games have been really good. And I think a lot of it is because guys are playing in them. Like there are some opt-outs, but there have been some wild bowl games. Obviously, Shedeur and Travis, they played for Colorado. It didn't go well, but they played in the game. Like it feels like maybe a tide is turning a little bit on bowl season.
I mean, Kyle McCord played and was breaking records out there as well. You had guys who, felt like maybe these games weren't meaningless and there was something on the line. You had other guys who maybe felt the pride of developing something cool with their teammates. And that's, Shedeur and Travis, kind of building Colorado up, want to go out and do it right one last time. I'm totally here for it. I've always been kind of stumping on the idea that these things mean something. And I think the more guys show up and kind of say, I might do the thing that nobody was doing a couple years ago, that's playing the bowl games, I think they do matter.
Yeah. Plus, there was just like a lot of emotions. So some of these like crazy swings games where, it's been a really cool bowl season. I think that we kind of thought that these games would be even more meaningless outside of the playoff structure, but it's really up to the players and the coaches and the teams in them to determine that meaning. And so it's been really cool.
And
before we get into the Pop-Tart, I'm sorry, what'd you say?
I said, and the bowl sponsors as well.
And the bowl sponsors. Yes. Like they've gone all in on a lot of this. And we'll get to that because obviously the WTF is the Pop-Tarts Bowl, and we have lots of clips to show you if you're watching on YouTube. But before we get into that, Joshua, I did want to talk about just some overall, as we kind of pivot back to CFP talk too, some overall storylines kind of heading into the quarterfinals. And I wrote about a couple of them on NBCSports.com. The number one to me, I think, is what Boise State and Arizona State have coming up. So these were the two teams that really sparked the entire conversation around seeding issues and like imbalanced brackets. The fact that Oregon has to play Ohio State in the quarterfinals, that's because like those 3 and 4 seeds are not actually the 3rd and 4th best teams in the field. It feels like they're both playing with a little bit of house money. And we've heard from Spencer Danielson in this, like, please count us out. Like, I love it kind of conversation, but also that there's something to prove about them earning that first round bye. Like, do you get any sense of that as kind of an overarching theme for at least 2 of those quarterfinals?
If either one of them would win the game, I don't know if it necessarily solves the problem that the seeding was proper, right? Like there could be an upset. And I think we can all agree that just because one of those teams pulls off an upset doesn't mean that the structure of how the bracket was created was necessarily right. I do think there is pressure, though, for them to prove something as underdogs for the very reason of people like me who are looking around and saying that this field probably feels too big after what we saw in the first round. It doesn't feel like it's really set up like March Madness where you can truly have a Cinderella. Upsets at this point, I do think would go a long way for those types of narratives. So I think there truly is some pressure on them. And like you want to show up and prove that you belong as well, just for the sake of your program and your pride and the things you've been selling to your players and the things that you've been working on. I think for the outside, it's important too. But even if they pull off the upset, which I would love to see, like give me one, please.
Yeah, same.
I still think they need to address the seeding aspect of it because it's not great right now.
I do too. It feels different, like with your team, because your team's always such a good example for this. First year of the 4-team playoff, number 4 seed, controversial selection because you guys bumped the Big 12 teams, but you go and win it all. So that proved that like there were more than 2 teams that deserved this. Like we went from 2 to 4. This is more of a seeding question. Like these teams deserve to be there because of the way that it was set up to have conference champions so that it's a national championship. The question of seeding is kind of secondary, but I do think that there is some pressure to perform just in light of conversations that were happening after the first round, and people who wanted to like retroactively talk about Indiana and SMU belonging. These teams earned their way in, but did they deserve that first round bye? It's going to be an annoying conversation. I would love to see one of these upsets as well, with that extra week of preparation and some of these great coaches that I think we're all excited to see on this stage, like a Kenny Dillingham for ASU. We will get into these games a little bit further. One other overarching storyline following is just this idea of the first round bye versus the path. And whether or not the path for Texas and Penn State, where we looked at the bracket and said, wow, we could pencil them into the semifinals, is more valuable than Oregon getting that bye. We've seen some teams get banged up, Texas in their offensive line, for example. And so just sort of that idea of, okay, we talk about the path and like favorable route to get to a championship game, but there's also 3 or 4 games you have to get through. You have to stay healthy. You have to, the wear and tear of all of this becomes a storyline as well. So, those are just kind of like the big picture thoughts I have heading into round 2, because some of these teams haven't played yet. And so we will get to see the value of that rest, the value of, not having to deal with injury risk from that additional game last week.
I do think it's interesting when you do talk about the path and it versus the bye, right? Like you have Boise State or Arizona State sitting there on the other side, and it's like, okay, I feel like I like that. But like if Penn State, for example, had to play Tennessee, just going back and watching that game tape after they played Ohio State, like they got blown out. That game was physical. Both of those teams were out there like smacking each other. And I think like the type of team that you would play if you didn't get a bye factors into it after watching the way some of those first round games look. Like you would 100% rather be fresh than play a team that's going to want to put you in a meat grinder and beat you up and punch you around. So I've kind of come around on that. Certainly the idea of being a double-digit favorite 2 times, I think you might roll the dice on that in terms of taking the bye and maybe having the extra long layoff, which could be an issue too, and all the things that come along with that. And so basically, case by case, very matchup dependent. But I am curious, right? Like I'm curious what an Oregon looks like after having so much time off. They look like the best team in the country probably after the first 3 weeks of the regular season. Do they kind of have some of those growing pains getting back out there, tackling, blocking, special teams, things of that nature when you have the time off? I think that's what you're battling a little bit too.
Right. 3 weeks since these conference championship games, which is actually basically what Notre Dame had heading into the first round, and they looked great, right? So we'll get further into kind of some of the key matchups and what's at stake for these games in just a second. But it's time to talk Pop-Tarts Bowl. But before we get to the fun stuff, there has been a whole online debate narrative. College football internet is really just bathing itself in glory these days. It's just argument after argument after argument, and some people really trying to tear down other people. But this is a fascinating conversation that's happening around Cam Ward. So he did not play the second half of the Pop-Tarts Bowl. This was a game that was, I think Miami had a 3-point lead at the half. He had 3 touchdowns in the first half, including the one that broke the record for most passing touchdowns in a single season in Division I, which is a record that might get broken again by Dylan Gabriel later this postseason, with Oregon still in action. But so Cam Ward, great first half, plays really well. The game was super fun. No one was getting a stop until basically like halfway through the second quarter. So it was a fun game. Obviously it's a really fun bowl. The game MVP gets to pick the mascot flavor that, is the one that gets toasted and they get to eat. Like there's a lot going on in this game. And then sort of, we come out after halftime and Cam Ward's not playing. It's Emory Williams. And everyone's sort of like, all right, was that just a predetermined outcome here? Which it seemed like it was, that the plan all along was for Cam Ward to play one half and then try out Emory Williams and see what you got. Of course, the game stays close and Miami gives up a touchdown in the game's final minute, tries to come back, can't do much. And so they lose by 1 point. And then this becomes a huge storyline that Cam Ward did not come back in this game and didn't come back in the final drive. The broadcast showed him tossing a ball around. It sort of looked like maybe he was going to try to come back in for the final drive. He did not. So afterwards, Cam Ward was not available to the media, and Mario Cristobal didn't really elaborate on it, which kind of allows this conversation to fester further. So he said, quote, "All meetings with players and decisions like that We made them in private. We keep them in private. So I'll prefer not to answer any questions as it relates to that. But I know he played his best while he was in there. Okay. With all of that preamble being said, Joshua, let's assume it was a predetermined outcome that he was going to play one half of this game. How do you feel about that when we've had conversations about guys who don't play at all, guys who decide to play the whole game, draft stock, risk, injury risk, all of that? How do you make sense of what Cam Ward did?
I read some tweets. Cam Ward let his team down. Cam Ward wasn't there when they needed him. You know what wasn't there when Miami needed it was the damn defense all year long. And we're going to pick like one half of a bowl game where Cam Ward is like, you know what, I'm going to be there. I'm going to prep with my team. I'm going to help get the next quarterback ready. Like, some of my receivers aren't playing in this game. Doesn't matter. Like, I know part of it is selfish chasing a record. I think he has every right to at this point. Like, I think you have every right to go out and do it. And so this whole let people down thing, like, dog, they could have been in the college football playoff if they had a halfway decent defense. So that's really what let them down. I don't want to hear any of that because Cam Ward did everything he tried to help them win as many games as possible this year. It's a weird thing to see, but I don't think it's necessarily a terrible thing to see. Like, you get to, he gets to finish his career the way that he desires to, which I think he's earned the right to do. Then you put in the backup quarterback, which everybody kind of wants to see. What's the future look like? Can he win us a game in a 2-minute drill, which he's clearly not ready to do right now? Is that going to be your quarterback moving forward, or do you feel like whatever the case is? So I feel like there's a lot of discourse and people just wanting to be mad about it, like they've never seen it before, and it was weird, and like, oh, I would never do that if it was me. Sorry, bro, you weren't good enough to ever play, so it wasn't you. The other part too about like, oh, the NFL is going to see this as a red flag. I promise you, they don't give a shit. They do not care. Like, they might actually see the red flag as like, bro, you actually wanted to play in the Pop-Tarts Bowl would be the question. They're not going to look at his leadership or him abandoning his team and knock him as an NFL prospect. Yeah,
that was a weird narrative. I don't think that anybody, especially just in the last decade with the amount of opt-outs we've had in bowl games, it doesn't seem like that would be anything that would be held against him. I get it from a fan perspective of, hey, this game is awesome. This is really fun. It's our last chance to get Cam Ward as our quarterback. And what? He's done. Like, he's done. The game is close. I understand that reaction. But I just, the weird part to me is the way the narrative is different than if guys had just opted out entirely. Like, would you, this is a question for you, Joshua. Like, would you have rather him not play the game at all versus playing a half? Like, does that feel different to you?
I'm glad I saw a half of Cam Ward, right? And like, I really think people are looking at this as a, it's a close game, and so he could help them win, which I think is very true. But there are other people who are acting like he just went in the locker room, took his helmet off in front of the team and said, well, I got my record, I quit, and then came back there on the sideline, like,
right, that it wasn't planned.
That it wasn't predetermined. Like, there wasn't a conversation
like, he did not
about
quit in the middle of the game.
That's the thing that really, but like, people are acting like that's what he did, and they're trying to make him some sort of demon.
I think Mario could have clarified that in the post game,
right? But and maybe I think he alluded to it pretty well from the standpoint of like, this is a decision. It was a decision. We make decisions in private, so we're not like, I get that. So I don't know.
Yeah, no, that whole thing has been really interesting. I don't think it's. I think it's. I'm with you where I would rather have gotten to see him for a half. I think it was awesome that he was going to play in that game.
Sure.
And he didn't owe anyone a full game. I think we can applaud guys that could opt out that don't, who play a whole game. We can applaud or feel weird about guys who play half a game. Mm-hmm. But you're right. Like, if it was a Pop-Tart Bowl without Cam Ward and you didn't have all of that electricity that you had in the first half, it's not as fun. It's not as exciting. And if you're a Miami fan, it's just, it's not the same experience. I do think that because there was a record at stake, and it was an individual passing touchdowns record, that also fed into the narrative that this was a selfish decision. But we've
why
seen
can't
this
he
before.
Do that, though?
But other players do that. They play in the bowl games to break records. That's right. Part of what happens.
I just mentioned at the top of the deal, Kyle McCord played in the bowl game to try to achieve the ACC record, I think, single season passing yards or whatever the case is.
I think Malik Neighbors broke an LSU record by playing in LSU's bowl game.
Yes. And like, literally, and the coaches get it too. And it's been like this for Kyle all year long. Like, all he did was ever spin the rock, but like all they did was spin the rock in the bowl game so he could get his yards.
Yep.
They were calling the plays for Cam Ward to be able to get his record. And I think either one of those guys, based off of the way that they played all year long, deserved an opportunity, if it was within reach, to go out and try to break the record. I have no problem with it.
Yeah, it's again weird to have this kind of discourse over a bowl game that's not part of the playoff. This is not someone
everybody
opting
tried to
out.
tell me it didn't matter. Oh, these games don't matter. Well, y'all are mad online.
What? Right. And you're saying that these are meaningless bowl games, which is part of the narrative, right? The games outside of the playoff are that. Then to get that upset over someone leaving at halftime over a game where the winner gets to eat a giant Pop-Tart cake is a little bit tough. But again, I get it. I get that fans think it's weird or would have rathered him play the whole game. It's just not something that I'm personally going to get that worked up about, because I'm with you. I'm glad we got to see him for a half. I'm glad we got to see some of those touchdowns and like the ping ponging of scoring that we had for the first half. It was awesome. And that gets us to the WTF on RTF, our favorite segment, the actual joy of the Pop-Tart Bowl. This is my Super Bowl. I love the Pop-Tart Bowl. And the Pop-Tart Bowl created people who come behind everything. So this year there were 3 mascots. So if you're watching on YouTube, which I recommend because we've got some clips queued up, we are watching the 3 mascots come out for their kind of like WWE style, like introduction video moment, like their close up. So they're each wearing the wrappers. So they're wearing Pop-Tart wrappers. And then they each have a different personality. So Hot Fudge Sundae goes first. Now, this is the clip that was on the broadcast where it's like kind of like stripping a little bit like Magic Mike-esque as he's being unwrapped and he's throwing the wrapper at, I think this one is it Cinnamon Roll goes next? Nope, Wildberry. Wildberry goes next, goes a little crazy. They all have different personalities. Which is one of my favorite things when I was reporting out a story on how this is going to work. And then Cinnamon Roll goes last. So there are 3 mascots. They were up to their antics the whole entire game. There was a great clip of Wildberry like trying to sneak up on a ref and bother him. Like this bowl, they see that there's a line somewhere of what is appropriate or what is not appropriate in a bowl game. And they're like, nope, we don't see that. We're going to go past it. We're going to figure out whatever we possibly could do. And it was a delight. It was a total delight of a bowl game.
I loved every moment of it. This is the strawberry tribute video, right? So like
yes.
The sacrifice from a year ago. I mean, it's phenomenal. We should honestly, we need to make sure that we honor the memory of Frosted Strawberry there. But like they lean into every aspect of it. Like they pulled in the storyline from last year with the first sacrifice, which I think is really good. I saw some of what was available concession wise too. Like they built that thing into a big thing. I'll tell you this though, Nicole. I was at dinner last night and we're at a restaurant that has a bar area that has TVs, and it's me and my wife Madison and another couple. We watched the end of the game so we could know who won. We could see all the stuff start to happen. And then when we got to the table, we flipped over to the feed for the celebration.
Yeah.
Because my wife and the other woman that was there, the other wife, had no idea about the sacrifice and how this all works. And they were legitimately intrigued once I explained to them like how this all goes on. And
did you tell them that Frosted Strawberry like was reincarnated? Like this was a major plot point of this broadcast, was that Frosted Strawberry like is risen.
I gave them as many like pieces of information about this game as I could. I was following your tweets a ton. But yeah, I mean, they all kind of got into it because it's fun and it's different. And it's not just like you have to be a football fan to be interested in doing this. The strawberry little thing did creep me out, though. I did not like the way strawberry
funny. Looked. It's like the last image we had from last year, like when they were eating the cake, they made it into a mascot. Our friends over at Art But Make It Sports, he made this incredible comp, the resurrection, of course, with like there is a like a rectangular Pop-Tart looking shape for the actual art that it's matched up with. It's perfect. But this bowl, again, there's no line they won't cross. I think that is what bowls need to embrace. Like we talk about this all the time, that like especially edible options are perfect for bowls and good they're just, they work really well because you can like douse a coach in it. You can celebrate with it. You can, the players want to eat it probably. And it's fun that way. But I just think that they are kind of the model of these games that are outside of the playoff, that you have to have fun with them, because you want the players to be excited that they got your bowl game. And then you want different things around it so that, people want to come in person, so that people are going to watch it on television. Like, it's just, it's cute. The antics are fun. And it reminds you, like, for all of the anger and arguments that we have in college football, which are part of the sport and always have been, that so are the goofy parts and so are the ridiculousness. And so the idea that like Rocco Becht got to pick which flavor that his team got to eat, which mascot got to go up there, the other mascots are like cheering them on, like celebrating that they get to make the self-sacrifice. It's hilarious. It's perfect. It's great. And I think that we need to continue to celebrate it. And obviously all of this went viral again for a second straight year, because I just think that this is the model of what you want to do to reward teams and give them something fun at the end of the year if they don't make the playoff.
I'm totally there with you. Like, it was always interesting to me. I made the comment, like, I would talk to guys who played in, different levels of bowl games throughout college. I was fortunate enough to play in like only New Year's Six bowl games or the college football playoff. And they did, outside of the Rose Bowl, probably like nothing too exciting. Like, you had the things to go to, but like the gifting suites weren't great. And some of the swag wasn't necessarily the best, because the game is the thing there. I used to talk to dudes that like, played in the Holiday Bowl or whatever. And they were like, oh man, it was the greatest week. They had a setup with all kinds of crazy stuff, because guys had to be excited to be there, or else nobody would want to do that. And I think, to your point, Pop-Tarts has really figured out that idea of player buy-in has to be big. Coaches should want to be there. And then we got to, people watching on TV, if we can get people to come, like, even better. But people watching on TV need a little bit more than just this like random bowl game between two teams who probably don't play very often, if at all. Like, I think they do it well.
Fun fact that I was told. So Illinois is playing in the Cheez-It Citrus Bowl against South Carolina. Brett Bielema was in town. So this is the same company that sponsors that bowl as the Pop-Tarts Bowl. So he was in town when they unveiled the Toaster Trophy, which is shaped like a football. And like, I think it was Andrew Adelson, our friend over at ESPN, like went over and took a photo of Brett, like taking a photo of the trophy. I was told, so that we need him in the Pop-Tart Bowl next year. We need Illinois to make the Pop-Tart Bowl. He was so excited about the trophy that he FaceTimed his wife to show her. Like, that's the kind of coach we need in the Pop-Tart Bowl next year. So we should honestly have like a watch list. Like, they should get to coach. They should get to pick teams and coaches that they think are most likely to embrace all the weirdness. So shout out to Illinois and to Brett Bielema. We would love to see you somehow. I know they're not in the right conferences to get the Pop-Tarts Bowl, but we'd love to open it up.
Damn the tie-ins. Let's just open this up to whoever
the most
decides
deserving
that
and the best. The most
That's right.
deserving and best candidates.
That's right.
Pop-Tarts Bowl. Speaking of most deserving and best in the college football playoff, let's dive into these games. So now we've got our 4 quarterfinal matchups. We'll go deep on all of them. And as a reminder, we are going to have, a wrap-up pod after we get through these games. We'll have plenty of coverage leading into the semifinals. We're going to be here with you and rushing the field for the duration as we go through this run. Let's go in order of the games. Let's start on New Year's Eve, Fiesta Bowl. Boise State, Penn State. We were talking about this a little bit earlier. Boise State, number 3 seed. Double-digit underdog here. So Penn State's favored by 10.5 points against Boise State. This game is obviously at the Fiesta Bowl, so they're out in Arizona. One quick note, which I think is going to be awesome, which we'll certainly see and hear on the broadcast, is Boise State is wearing their blue, white, orange uniforms. Then this is what they have worn in 3 Fiesta Bowls, all wins, but dating back to obviously their historic first Fiesta Bowl. They'll be wearing that uniform. Spencer Danielson was like, I have no choice. Like, of course we're going to wear that uniform in this game. So that's a cool storyline. And then as I was mentioning, I mean, just the way that he has talked about this, he's obviously aware that they are heavy underdogs in this game. So Spencer Danielson, head coach of Boise State, if nobody gives us a chance, if the point spread continues to grow, whatever, please count us out. That's what Boise State football is built on. People thinking we can't do anything, and we work our tails off to find a way to prove people wrong. I believe in our team, and we use the phrase, put the ball down. Doesn't matter the stadium or what fans are there on the 31st. Put the ball down. We're going to be ready. This game could be really fun. I mean, I would love it not to be a blowout here. And the big matchup to me here, Joshua, is Penn State's defense and Ashton Jeanty. And then they're aware of that. And they've been talking about it. They know it's going to be like a team effort to stop him because he's very hard to bring down. So it's not just that, he's got almost 2,500 rushing yards on the season. He's actually only 131 yards shy of Barry Sanders' single season rushing record now. But he's also got a ton of yards after contact this season. He's got more yards after contact this season than most teams have this season. They're giving him Boise State credits. It's almost 1,900 yards after contact and 143 missed tackles. So Tom Allen, defensive coordinator of Penn State, he has made that point clear. Like, you got to get him down. It's going to be on a bunch of different players to do that. And it's a defense that has been good. I mean, they're 7th nationally against the run, top ranked run defense remaining in the playoff field. But that's kind of going to be the game, because either you can slow or stop him. And, the game becomes, it's on Maddox Madsen's arm to determine, or Penn State's able to control the game because Boise State really can't get anything going. But we've seen teams try to stop Ashton Jeanty, knowing that he is Boise State, and them not really be able to do it. And I'm still rusher for over 200 yards. So how do you see this matchup with Penn State's rush defense?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great matchup. I actually have kind of similar experience in a spot like this. In 2014, we played Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship game. It was Melvin Gordon was the running back for the Badgers, and he was having one of those historic years. I think 2 weeks before we played in the conference championship game, he had that game where he had over 400 rushing yards against Nebraska, I think it was. He was a Heisman finalist. He was phenomenal, and we knew that our job, number one, was to make sure that he did not ruin our night. He is not the guy who can win that game for them. If somebody else on that team can beat us, we will live with that. But Melvin Gordon wasn't going to be the guy. And I think that Penn State's going to have a very similar approach when it comes to Ashton Jeanty and forcing Boise State to try to play left-handed. Now, what we ended up doing from a game plan perspective was we wanted to make sure that we were gapped out, meaning we had a player for every gap and then a free hitter in the box so we could tackle the runner. We played straight man-to-man. We lined our safeties up at 10 yards, and we said, we think our corners can hang out there on an island. We think our safeties will be able to pick up these tight ends. Linebackers can do the same thing. I wouldn't be shocked if Penn State, who's already a team that plays a ton of man-to-man, would come out in a game plan like that. But they got to tackle this dude, to your point. And he is shifty. He's elusive. He has great contact balance. He's got really good vision and patience to let plays set up too. So it's a challenge, no doubt. But I think Penn State kind of understands what they're up against. And certainly when it's a running back centric defense, if you do have that talent advantage, plus you have the right scheme, there is a way to make sure that he's not the guy who takes the game over.
Yeah, I think that is where it's going to come down to. And Maddox Madsen's a good quarterback. I think he kind of has been underappreciated or under talked about because of the run game. But that's really, I think, what it's going to come down to is what he's going to be able to do. And then, when I've talked to different defensive coordinators who played Boise State this year, they always just talk about like the wear and tear of Jeanty. Mm-hmm. So like he may not get a ton of yards in the first quarter, but he's going to get a lot of carries. So he's going to try to wear you down the longer the game goes on, and then he'll get his at some point. And we've seen that in a number of games, even games where he's eventually gotten over 200 yards in the game. Like it wasn't all from the start. But he's always capable of those long runs. So it's going to be really interesting. And then on obviously the flip side, Penn State, they didn't have a passing touchdown in their win over SMU because they had all of those pick sixes. But they've really got the run game going a lot better in the last couple of outings. And you just have to feel like confident that is going to continue to balance things out for Drew Aller. And then that they don't need to rely on Tyler Warren for literally every offensive piece of production that they have this season. And, you've got to give a huge advantage to them against Boise State's defense, which we saw give up a lot of yards and a lot of points to teams in the Mountain West this year.
No doubt. And just real quick to touch back on what you were saying about Jeanty and wearing people out. this is a game where if you're Penn State, you got to be able to show off a little bit of that depth up front to that point. So by the time you get to the fourth quarter, he's not just smacking the same guys in the face. I actually like the idea of the guys talking about how much he can wear on teams there. But flipping it over to the other matchup, yeah, Boise State defensively, certainly not the most impressive team. But it's like this Penn State offense is like this Jekyll and Hyde, where like some weeks I look at them and I'm like, damn, that's it's one of the best offenses in the country. And then other weeks I look at them and it's like, well, they're an offense. And
it looks hard. It looks hard.
Yeah, it's like they got a good looking quarterback who at his top end, like first round pick, no doubt. We don't always get that. It's not always on display that same way. I thought their wide receivers played well in the Big Ten championship game. They come out and against SMU, and it's kind of like they are who they are. They're not game breakers. I don't think they need to play an A+ game against Boise State's defense to be able to move the ball and have some success. I think they need to, in terms of if they are actually going to make a run in the playoffs and be a championship team, they got to start playing their best offensive ball with consistency right now.
I completely agree. So I do think that Penn State will win this game. The number is a lot. Would you take them to cover 10.5?
Yeah, I would.
Yeah, I think I might too. All right, let's go to the other one that has an even larger spread. Texas favored by 13 points over Arizona State. So the Sun Devils, Big 12 champs, they get the first round bye. Texas top at large team in the field. This is where we talk about that balance, right? Like Texas was the third best team in the field. So that's why they're, favored by so much and everyone expects them to win this game. But you've got a red hot Arizona State team. You've got a team that Sark has been very complimentary of. And he went out of his way to point out that like Texas did not win the Big 12 all the time and it means something for Arizona State to do it in year one, playing with a ton of confidence. He said that in the last 2 months, I think they're playing as good at football as anybody in the country, called Cam Skattebo a monster. So he knows. I mean, he knows where they're going to have to stop Arizona State to control the game and to do the things that they want to. And it's similar to what we were just talking about with Boise State. If you make sure that Cam Skattebo can't beat you, then you're putting it on Sam Leavitt. You're putting it on other players to try to do that, as well as a defense that I think is going to probably be pretty overwhelmed by what Texas wants to do, especially when they want to run the ball, which we saw they were able to do at will against Clemson. Now, the Longhorns then we talk about bye versus path. Longhorns got banged up. Multiple offensive line players, not out for the year, but definitely got banged up in their first round game. That's kind of my only question here, because I do think that Texas is going to be able to control the game at the line of scrimmage. Even if Cam Skattebo gets, a few long runs or is able to do his thing, I just don't think that Arizona State is going to be able to stop Texas or really slow them, especially like when we just saw Clemson struggle so much against the run.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because I tend to agree with that. And especially if Texas runs it the way that they did against Clemson, it becomes much more difficult to see the pathways for Arizona State. But I feel like Arizona State is a team that's played edgier football than Texas has all year long. Like I look at the Texas offense and I don't want to be this disparaging because I know they're really good and talented, but it almost feels like a paper tiger at times where it's like Sark is a phenomenal play designer and they typically just have better players than the other team. But like, I don't look at Quinn Ewers and be like, I think he's taking games over. And I don't look at their wide receivers and consistently say, I think they're just cooking people. Like, I think Sark puts them all in the best spot to be really successful. And I'm curious where like this junkyard dog mentality of a team in Arizona State comes in and is like, I don't care about your schemes. I don't care how you design offense. Like we want to play like football. And can they kind of slow that down and make it more difficult for him, at least early on in the game? I'd be curious there. To your point, Skattebo, if he gets off, now we're really talking about a game that could get dicey. But this is a little bit like the Boise State thing we just talked about, where Leavitt's been flying under the radar. And I think he's a good player. And I just don't know how much firepower they really have. But I am curious to see if that offense can get cooking a little bit, how Texas will respond defensively. I do think Texas is one of the best, if not the best defense in the country. Certainly they gave up some plays to Clemson, but I also think Cade Klubnik's going to be one of the best quarterbacks coming back next year. So all of that to say, I'm more interested in this game than the Fiesta, and I think it actually has a little bit of a chance to be closer than what the number says.
Yeah, I do too. I'm going to take Arizona State to cover, and maybe have a chance to win. It's tough, right? Like the
Right.
talent disparity, it could certainly come into play. But you're right about just like the way that Arizona State plays, how hot they were at the end. The Kenny Dillingham, he was, what was he doing to the helmet? He like sledgehammered the helmet,
Yeah, he's
right?
he's
Like,
he's a little bit of a psycho.
yeah, he's a crazy guy, football guy.
Yeah, yeah,
But like I want to see what that looks like, right? Where they've got like literally nothing to lose. And they're just gonna throw it all out at this team, even though they know they don't have the same talent. They're gonna try to be physical, they're gonna try to do all the stuff, and do it for as long as possible to
yeah.
stay in this game. So I hope it's a good one. So maybe this is a little bit wish casting, but I'm gonna take Arizona State to cover here.
I'm certainly wish casting. I'll put that out, just out in the open. But I like I said, I do want to see one of these upsets, right? Like I think it would be great, at least for the validity, in my opinion, of this big ass playoff field that I can't stand. But I agree with you. Arizona State's hot again. When you have all that time off, it's the tackling, it's the ball security, it's special teams, it's the blocking, things of that nature that can get a little bit wonky. But I think that they're going to bring the fight to Texas, a team that, you know, they've been punched by Georgia, and that's kind of it all year long.
Yeah.
You know, I do think it could be a catch them off guard type of situation if you really punch them early in this one. All right, let's get to the Rose Bowl here. You're heading out that way, correct?
Yep.
Yeah, it's one of the all-time greats. I've been to 3 of them, covered 3 of them, have loved every single one of them. My parents are going out. Shout out to them. Number 1, Oregon. Number 8, Ohio State. That's the Wednesday, 5 p.m. Eastern. You'll see the sun set behind the mountains. It is phenomenal. Ohio State actually favored by 2.5 points at this juncture. Over under is 55.5. So this is the rematch of the game that happened back in October. Oregon wins at home by a point. There were so many things that happened in that game. Dillon Gabriel didn't get touched by Ohio State's defense. You know, he's throwing the ball all over the field. Ohio State offensively, like, pretty good. Run game kind of disappears in the second half. Will Howard trying to make a little something, has that little boneheaded slide play there to end the football game. I think there's like so much that happened there, but also so many ways that these teams are different right now. Jordan Burch didn't play the first time. I think that Oregon's defense certainly has come along there. I think their run game has become a little bit more of a feature, and maybe kind of started with that Ohio State game for Oregon. Flip side of that, Ohio State turned a corner on defense. I think they've only given up over 100 yards passing, 3 times after that, 4 times after that, whatever the number is. It's been really good. All of that to say, Nicole, are we getting the national championship matchup a little bit too early?
Yes, 100%. This is where the seeding really sticks out like a sore thumb, right? The fact that Ohio State, well, listen, first of all, they lost to Michigan, so they dropped, right? Like that was going to affect their ranking in their season,
right?
But because the seeds 3 and 4 aren't really the 3rd and 4th best teams, Ohio State should be higher. Ohio State should be 6th. They shouldn't have to meet the number 1 team in the country in the bracket this early. So it does feel that way. I'm going to write about that for NBCSports.com about how this feels like it's a heavyweight fight, feels like a national championship game. The winner of this game will be the odds-on favorite to win it all, rightfully so. But it also just feels very unfair for the number 1 overall seed to have this, especially with Ohio State. We've said it all year, right? The talent on the roster, the way that they were built for a national championship run, we didn't see it all come together in the same way that we saw it in the first round against Tennessee. But this is what we've been scared of. This is what everyone else has been afraid of having to play a team that was playing the way that they did against Tennessee. So you're getting, yes, you had a bye. You had 3 weeks off your Oregon. You do have Jordan Burch this go around. So you're going to hopefully be able to get that pressure on,
by the way,
Will Howard.
Jordan Burch is a real life alien, like from a physical standpoint. I've not necessarily seen a guy who looks quite like that and can move quite the way he does.
That's what Oregon does, right? Though, like the athlete and the speed and the agility and that 8.5 sacks in just 9 games this season. Like, he will be a factor in this matchup. But yes, it does feel like there is a ton at stake, and you're getting the best version of Ohio State that we have seen this season up against the team that's been the best and most consistent team all season long. I've talked about this. The way Oregon's season's gone, there's been like ups and downs, but like the ability to get up. So, they got that big game against Boise State early when they didn't really quite have their offensive line totally figured out. Then they had the big game against Ohio State in mid-October, right? So you kind of had these like peaks and valleys of like get up for these games. And then we saw them get up for the Big Ten championship game against Penn State. And listen, Penn State's offense did do some things that we haven't seen them do against Oregon's defense. So you got to be a little bit concerned about that. But if Oregon is able to do the things that Oregon does well, which is protect Dylan Gabriel, give him time, let him cook with his different receivers and tight ends and all these people he has good chemistry with. Jordan James on the ground. He rushed for 115 against Ohio State the first time these two teams played. And only twice this season has somebody rushed for over 100 yards on Ohio State. And it was Michigan and it was Oregon. So there is some things that like you can piece together a game plan for Oregon to win it again a second time. You do have an element of the rematch, right? And the familiarity that comes into play here, which I think, Joshua, I mean, tell me what it's like to play in the rematch, but you got to give the edge to the team that lost the game, right? Especially in a close game, just the ability to make up for whatever differences you felt that you had.
Yeah, I mean, the team that loses is typically the team that probably has to like make more adjustments throughout the year. If you're Oregon, why would you change a whole bunch of things? Right? Like you played really good football for a large swath of the year after like that very beginning part of the season. You won that game, you won your conference. Like they're probably looking and it's like, we got to tweak this, we have to tweak that. But they already made their changes. They did that when they shuffled their offensive line. They got some guys back healthy. Ohio State, you lose to Oregon. It's like, okay, they changed the defense at that point. Defense played much better. They lose to Michigan. It's like everything goes to hell. And now it's like, all right,
the
now we
entire
have
game plan changed finally after that.
For offense, it was just like, we're going to do everything that makes us successful. And so I do think there is this interesting, like Ohio State's probably done more adjusting and they've probably had to change a little bit more than Oregon. So from a game plan standpoint, like you might see a little bit more of the October Oregon and you're not going to see a ton of the October Ohio State, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And last thought on this before we get to the other game. What do you make of this retooled offensive line? Because that was one thing that I think we were all concerned about, had questions about Tennessee's defensive front and Ohio State's offensive line that had 2 season-ending injuries. They also had a few weeks to work on it and to get those guys practicing together, and it held up a lot better than I think people expected. What do you make of where the O-line is?
It was interesting. I thought that they did a good job on James Pierce Jr. against Tennessee. They clamped him up. I was actually disappointed watching him, and I went back and watched some other stuff. It's a different conversation for a different type of show. Thought they had a great plan for him. I thought they had a really good plan for the guys on the interior too. I think the difference between the Tennessee interior guys and the Oregon interior guys is like Tennessee's dudes were big as hell, but I don't think they moved very well. Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant moved very well for Michigan. And, Derek Harmon on the interior for Oregon is big, but he moves extremely well too. I think that's going to be the challenge now is like, you can hold them up at the line of scrimmage. You might be able to move them a little bit if they're just big dudes and you can get the double teams. But now you have a big guy who also has really agile feet. That's going to be tough for them. That's going to be the challenge for them in this one. I think they can create plans offensively to try to overcome that. But ultimately, it's a different type of athlete on the Oregon defensive line than what they saw against Tennessee.
Yeah, and I know you're really high on Derek Harmon in general.
I love him. I think he's an alien too.
Yeah, they've got a lot of aliens. I'm going to take Oregon here. I think this again is a national championship caliber game that unfortunately we're getting in the quarters. But I had picked Oregon in the preseason. I picked them all the way through my postseason bracket. So I think they're going to beat Ohio State for a second time.
Yeah, it's hard because I've flip-flopped on this. I had Ohio State at one point early, winning this game. Flip it back, you get Oregon kind of came around, and that's what I've picked in all my brackets. And then I watched the way Ohio State played against Tennessee, and I was like, oh my God. Like, I mean, that team right there wins the title. I I think I got to roll with Oregon. It's what I put on wax before the playoffs started. And I would selfishly love to be wrong in this situation.
It's kind of a win-win, right? Either you're right as what you
I'm
picked,
hedging,
or you're right as
like
Buckeye.
this is the hedge. It feels pretty good. But to that point though, Dan Lanning, every occasion this year when it was a question about like, well, what kind of coach is Dan Lanning? And at the beginning of the year, hadn't beat his rivals, hadn't won big games. He answered every damn question, right? Won a conference title. He beat all the big teams he needed to beat the rivals. I think he's kind of having that year, you know? So I'm going to roll.
Might very well be doing that. All right, let's talk about the other heavyweight fight. This one also, I know there's no Carson Beck, but feels like it could be a heavyweight game, like a little bit, maybe not national championship preview in the same way as the Rose Bowl, but man, the Sugar Bowl is like everything that you want in a quarterfinal game.
It is going to be phenomenal, as you mentioned. Number 2 Georgia, number 7 Notre Dame. Wednesday, super late. I actually hate it. Super late, 8:45 p.m. kick. This is an interesting line because it's kind of done the pendulum thing. It swung a little bit. Georgia favored by 1.5 right now. Certainly feels like a pick 'em to me. I think these teams are very evenly matched, over under 44.5 there. So Carson Beck not in this game. He had, I believe, the UCL surgery on his elbow. He's going to be out, declared for the draft. So got hurt in the SEC championship game and said, I am good here. So enter Gunnar Stockton. And I'll let you get into this a little bit more, but per an ESPN profile, he drives a 1984 Ford F-150 truck. Uncle called him a plain rapper guy. I don't know what the hell that means.
Like candy wrapper.
I know, but I'm saying though.
You're a sometimes guy. The ones you should understand.
The ones in the plain wrappers are the best ones. That's what I'm trying to get at.
But I just think of it's like no frills. Like he's a no frills guy. I like it. It's like a different descriptor for a guy. It's really interesting. So yeah, this is a great piece on ESPN. Kind of like introduced everyone to Gunnar Stockton, who, by the way, like the name, everything, like he just sounds like a Georgia quarterback, right? Like if you're like, okay, who can they win national championships with? Stetson Bennett and Gunnar Stockton. It just seems to fit. But you know, we didn't see him a lot this season. He redshirted in 2022, attempted 19 passes in 4 games last year, and then he was only in 3 games when he had to come into the game in the SEC championship game and led Georgia's comeback against Texas. But he is someone who is really good at football, right? Like he's always grown up and been really good since he was about 6. It's actually a really great story. Like his dad asked a coach who's actually Mike Bobo's dad to work with him because he thought he had something. So there's a lot of different ties with the Georgia staff now and how it all worked. In high school, he broke Trevor Lawrence's state record for career touchdown passes and Deshaun Watson's state mark for career total yardage. So like he was an elite prospect and a great player in high school. We just haven't seen a lot out of him. And maybe this is a positive in some ways. Obviously, you don't want Carson Beck to get injured, but he was really inconsistent over the course of this season. We went through that stretch in the middle of the season where he was throwing more interceptions than he was throwing touchdowns. He was putting Georgia in a really tough position. But now you've got a guy making his first career start up against a Notre Dame defense that we know, we've been watching them really closely, but I think anyone who hadn't saw it in the first round, really physical, really tough. And it's going to be, you know, they're going to get pressure on this quarterback making his first career start. So let's start there with the Notre Dame defense and a brand new quarterback, first start for Georgia and Gunnar Stockton.
Yeah, I think it's going to be tough for Gunnar Stockton. So Riley Mills is going to be out there for Notre Dame, is going to be out for Notre Dame, which is unfortunate for them. He's a phenomenal player. They've done a great job, though, anytime they've gotten banged up on the defensive line, which has been a few times this year of rolling guys through and figuring out the rotation and trying to get back some of that production. I think it's not just the pressure that the D-line can bring. Georgia's wide receivers hate catching the football. It is Georgia wide receivers versus catching the football is the matchup that you need to watch. And Notre Dame secondary is a very good unit. And I think they can confuse him. I think the secondary can close quickly, make the windows small. Like I think it's a really tough defense to have to step in when you're the backup quarterback. And they didn't ask him to do very much when he stepped in against Texas. And they came back and they won that football game. So I'm giving them all the credit in the world for doing that. I like this Notre Dame D. I think they're going to cause some real issues for young Gunner Stockton.
Yeah, I do too. And I was at Notre Dame, Indiana. The Riley Mills injury was a really tough moment. They're seeing, in the post game, I don't know that they thought that he would necessarily be done for the year, just in the way that they were talking about it, but he is, and he's not going to be coming back in the CFP here. He led the team in sacks. I mean, he has been really important. And like you saw the impact that this defensive line, as fully healthy, was having in that game. But to your point, they have plugged and played guys who have been great, right? Like there's been very little drop off with this elite defense over the course of the season. They're also elite on multiple levels. So it's not like it's all going to come down to the pressure that they're able to get on Gunner Stockton. But let's flip it to the other side. So this is a Notre Dame offense that we know how good they are when they run it, right? Especially Riley Leonard when he runs it. And that adds to Jeremiah Love and company and what they're able to do on the ground. This is a Georgia defense that, statistically does not match up with where that unit has been in recent years, but we have seen them basically shut down Texas twice when they have played them, especially on the ground. So what are the keys on this side of the ball?
I think I was watching a lot of Georgia's defense, and I think one of the things that makes them really hard to deal with is they do a good job of getting guys going vertical on their defensive line. They know how to punch a hole into an offensive line to create different seams and get guys free. And I think the flip side of that is if you don't make the play, it creases because everybody's so aggressive. Everybody's so vertical. They're trying to create so much havoc up front. I think it can cause some problems for Notre Dame. Like, I don't think they've really seen that type of defense or the caliber of twitchy athlete that they use to try to create some of the movement up front. I think there's an adjustment period. I also don't think it's a great run defense in general. I don't think they're an elite tackling team either. And I think that creates opportunities for Notre Dame to be able to stick to the typical game plan that they've had and to have some success. Now, if Notre Dame does get into the situation where they can't create the runs, I don't know if they can win the game. Because if they got to sit there and they got to try to pass pro and they got to try to get guys open against some of the players in this Georgia secondary, Malachi Starks, players like that. Sorry, dude. Don't know what to tell you. But outside of that, I do think it's like as favorable of a matchup as Notre Dame probably could get against an opponent like Georgia.
Yeah, and I think it's part of the reason that a lot of people picked them to get all the way to the national championship game, like I did. You did, right, as well?
Yeah, I did.
Or do you have? Yeah, because you already had Carson Beck's health in question, and then the idea of a quarterback making their first career start against this defense is part of it. But we still don't know exactly what would happen if Notre Dame goes down multiple scores early and it's all on Riley Leonard's arm. We say that every time they go into a big game because
it's good to remind people, though. They have not had to do that at all.
Right. Because they crushed people. They just completely crushed people. They get up on people early. They're turning the ball over. They're getting all the things that you want early in games. And we saw it against Indiana too, right? Like Indiana was driving. Xavier Watts picks off Curtis Rourke. And then you get a long run by Jeremiah Love. And honestly, the game's kind of over, right? Like those are the two highlights that you needed from the first round. So what happens if they're not able to get those types of plays early? We'll learn something about Notre Dame, but this is another heavyweight fight. Cannot wait for the 3 games that we're going to have on New Year's Day. It's going to be an amazing triple header, but certainly those last 2 games and the Rose and the Sugar.
This last game? Did you make your pick?
Oh, I did not make a pick.
Yeah.
I'm taking Notre Dame. So I guess since they're the underdogs, I will take them plus the points.
Yeah, I'm going with Notre Dame too. So I picked before the game. This is like if I don't know, even if Carson Beck was healthy, I don't think this is a Georgia team that gets a 2-score lead on you very early in the game and makes you have to chase. They're not a great run the ball team. They got a question at quarterback. I think their defense is good, but it's like
it's not elite.
They're an average run defense, and you love to run the ball. Like this is as good of a matchup as Notre Dame could have gotten against Georgia.
Yeah, I agree. I agree on all those fronts. And I think Georgia's just been really inconsistent week to week.
Mhm.
And part of that was Carson Beck, but that was just, like they struggled against Kentucky when only one SEC team lost to Kentucky. Like there were just signs throughout the season.
What SEC team lost to Kentucky?
Oh, it was Ole Miss. Lane
Oh, what was
Kiffin,
their coach doing during the first round?
He was tweeting incessantly during every game except Tennessee's game.
How'd that go for him?
They still have a bowl game to play as well. We'll see how Lane's team gets going there. But yeah, it's gonna be a fun one. It's gonna be a fun holiday. This is New Year's Day is a college football day, and it's so great to have so many meaningful games here. That is one thing that I think they nailed in this new format, is to have, again, based on the calendar, you had limited options, but to get the quarterfinals and 3 of them locked in on New Year's Day is great. And it's going to be so much fun. Cannot wait. I'll be at the Rose Bowl. But everyone who's going to just be on their couch enjoying those games, I hope it is as good as it should be. And I'm hoping, with those first 2 games of the big spreads, I'm hoping we get at least one close game, maybe an upset there. I know Joshua is rooting for that as well. We will have lots of rushing the field coverage after the quarterfinals. We'll get you set for the semis. We'll get you set for the national championship game. So much still to come with this pod. So be sure to subscribe, rate, review us. We appreciate all of that. But for Joshua Perry, I'm Nicole Auerbach. Thanks for listening, and we will see you soon. Enjoy the games.